This is a homily for the 8th Sunday in Ordinary Time. The first reading is from the book of Ecclesiasticus, chapter 27, verses 4 to 7. The responsorial psalm is taken from Psalm 91. The Gospel for this Sunday comes from the Gospel of St. Luke, chapter 6, verses 39 to 45. To download the text of this homily as a PDF file, go to sundayhomilies.au. Ash Wednesday falls on this coming Wednesday, March the 5th. Easter this year is celebrated on April the 20th. So today is the final Sunday of Ordinary Time before we begin the season of Lent this coming Wednesday. Ordinary Time resumes this year on Monday, June the 9th, at the end of the Easter season. However, we celebrate 3 solemnities on the Sundays following the Easter season. Firstly, the Solemnity of the Most Holy Trinity, then the Most Holy Body and Blood of Christ. And this year, because July the 29th falls on a Sunday, we celebrate the feast day of Saints Peter and Paul on what would otherwise have been the 13th Sunday in Ordinary Time. On Sunday, July the 6th, we resume celebrating Sundays in Ordinary Time. In today's Gospel, we are still with Jesus during his ministry in the Galilee region, and we are still listening to Luke's account of the Sermon on the Plain. In today's Gospel, we have 3 lessons in discipleship. Firstly, a blind person cannot lead a blind person. Keep in mind the episode that Luke places at the beginning of Jesus' public ministry, his return to Nazareth. Jesus goes to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, and he is handed the scroll of the prophet Isaiah. He then reads these verses: "The Spirit of the Lord has been given to me, for he has anointed me. He has sent me to bring the good news to the poor, to proclaim liberty to captives, and to the blind new sight, to set the downtrodden free, to proclaim the Lord's year of favour." Then, sitting down, which was the traditional posture for preaching, Jesus then said, "This text is being fulfilled today, even as you listen." So in Luke's Gospel, Jesus begins his ministry announcing the recovery of sight for the blind. Jesus' disciples should therefore be prepared to lead those both physically and metaphorically blind. Luke offers a practical example of such leadership in the Acts of the Apostles. An angel instructs Philip to set out along the road that leads from Jerusalem to Gaza. There he meets an Ethiopian eunuch who was struggling to understand a passage from the prophet Isaiah. Philip asks, "Do you understand what you are reading?" He replies, "How could I, unless I have someone to guide me?" So, starting with this passage of Isaiah, Philip proclaims the good news of Jesus to him. When they come to some water by the roadside, the eunuch asks for baptism. Philip opens the eyes of someone who had been reading the Scriptures but was unable to see what they meant. The image that Jesus uses of the blind leading the blind warns us about uncommitted Christians masquerading as reliable guides. As we shall see, such uncommitted disciples will eventually be exposed by the fruit they bear. The second lesson in discipleship is about hypocrisy, about ignoring the log in our own eye. Jesus says this, Why do you observe the splinter in your brother's eye and never notice the plank in your own? Hypocrite! Take the plank out of your own eye first, and then you will see clearly enough to take out the splinter that is in your brother's eye. This warns us of a danger that threatens all disciples, and that is the inclination to judge others. But New Testament scholar Alan Culpepper raises an important question. How can we help making judgments? What sort of persons would we be if we made no moral judgments? We are constantly faced with the need to make discriminating moral choices. Learning to judge between right and wrong and developing an acute sense of rightness and justice, while being able to spot hypocrisy, moral compromises and oppression, reflects a heightened spiritual awareness. What then does Jesus mean by this warning not to judge others? Culpepper offers this answer. Jesus was talking about a particular kind of judgment. The judgment in view is the inclination to condemn others for their faults and failures. Disciples do not grow better by comparing themselves with someone else. Some of us have gotten so sharp that we can put someone else down with just the quickest flick of the tongue. We are black belts in innuendo and faint praise. Not a speck in our brother's eye escapes our notice. Judging is the sin of those who are blind to their own faults. A woman brought her granddaughter to Gandhi with a request. She was concerned about the amount of sugar the little girl was eating. It was not good for her. But the granddaughter paid no attention to anything her grandmother said. But perhaps a rebuke coming from the great Mahatma Gandhi would change the girl's behaviour. The grandmother pleaded with Gandhi, "Tell my granddaughter to stop eating so much sugar." Gandhi replied, "Bring the girl back to me next week." They went away and returned the following week. But on this occasion, Gandhi said exactly the same thing. "Bring her back next week." And the same thing happened again the following week. Finally, when they came to see him at the end of the fourth week, Gandhi said to the girl, "You should not eat so much sugar. It is not good for you." Grandmother was rather annoyed and somewhat disappointed. "We waited 4 weeks for this simple remark. Why couldn't you have told her that when I first brought her to you?" To which Gandhi replied, "It's taken me that long to stop eating too much sugar myself." None of us, including the great Mahatma Gandhi, wants to be known as a hypocrite. Our English word hypocrite is borrowed from the Greek. However, the Greek word hypocrites doesn't mean hypocrite. It's the word for an actor. So how do we get hypocrite from a word meaning an actor? Well, in ancient Greek drama, the story was told out loud by a chorus, while at the same time it was being acted out by performers who did not speak. They told the story using masks and gestures. All of the actors wore a mask. And that means that the actor pretends to be someone he or she is not. And that is, in essence, the meaning of our English word hypocrisy. Pretending to be someone we're not, acting a part. It refers particularly to the pretense of virtue or goodness. The third lesson in discipleship is about producing good fruit. Let's now turn to today's first reading and the responsorial psalm. The lectionary has chosen a passage from the book of Ecclesiasticus to complement today's gospel reading. So let's spend a few minutes reflecting on this first reading. The book of Ecclesiasticus is one of the wisdom books. The wisdom books include Job, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Wisdom, and the book of Ecclesiasticus. The wisdom books are included in the third section of the Hebrew Bible, the writings. The books of Wisdom and Ecclesiasticus were included in the Septuagint, that is, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. However, when the list of scrolls to be included in the writings was finalized, about 100 AD, Wisdom and Ecclesiasticus were not included. For that reason, they don't appear in the Hebrew Bible, nor will you find them in Protestant Bibles. The Catholic and Orthodox churches have included both books in the canon of sacred scripture. The wisdom tradition developed out of observation rather than from revelation. This brings to mind these words of St. Paul in his letter to the Romans. Ever since the creation of the world, God's eternal power and divine nature, invisible though they are, have been understood and seen through the things he has made. When wise people of old reflected upon the regularity in nature and the consequences of their actions, they concluded that there was a mysterious underlying order, a dynamic cosmic design in the world. If we live in harmony with this order, we will experience happiness and enjoy success. If we disregard this order, life will be beset with difficulties. A fundamental element of the wisdom books is a reflection upon the world in which the authors lived, with the goal of discerning what contributes to an ordered and harmonious life. The title Ecclesiasticus comes from the Latin Liber Ecclesiasticus, which means Book of the Church. This name was used by Latin-speaking Christians in North Africa because of the book's prominent use in churches for catechesis. Ecclesiasticus is the first Jewish wisdom book in which the author identifies himself by name. In chapter 50, verse 27, the author gives his name as Yeshua ben, son of, Eleazar, son of Sirah. This gave rise to the name of the book in Hebrew as the Wisdom of Ben Sirah, and in Greek as Sirach. It was written about 180 BC, and this work is the result of a lifelong quest for wisdom. This is what we find in today's first reading. It is a short collection of proverbs containing wisdom that has been gleaned from life experience. In its own way, each proverb demonstrates how life itself tests the value of things. In particular, these proverbs deal with the revealing character of one's speech. In a shaken sieve, the rubbish is left behind. So too the defects of a man appear in his talk. Scripture scholar Diane Burgant offers this explanation. The first proverb insists that appearances are deceiving. When wheat is first cut, it contains the husk, some beard, and straw. Only with some kind of threshing does this refuse appear. So it is with people. First impressions are not always accurate. However, once someone starts talking, the facade falls away, and the real person is revealed. The second proverb addresses the same issue but using a different metaphor. The kiln tests the work of the potter. The test of a man is in his conversation. Diane Bergant explains, "It is impossible to fashion pots that will endure without firing them in a kiln. However, too much heat will crack the pots. The potter must know just how much heat the pottery can endure. So it is with people. Tribulation tests the mettle of the person, and that mettle is revealed in one's speech." The third parable, "The orchard where the tree grows is judged on the quality of its fruit. Similarly, a man's words betray what he feels." Today's responsorial psalm also takes up the image of a tree and the fruit it bears. "The just will flourish like the palm tree and grow like a Lebanon cedar. Planted in the house of the Lord, they will flourish in the courts of our God, still bearing fruit when they are old, still full of sap, still green." This brings us to today's Gospel, where Jesus teaches from within the wisdom tradition of Israel, using the metaphor of a tree and the fruit it bears. "No good tree produces rotten fruit, nor again does a rotten tree produce good fruit, for every tree is known by its own fruit. People do not pick figs from thorns, nor gather grapes from a bramble. A good person brings out what is good from the store of goodness of the heart. An evil person draws out what is evil from the store of evil. For the mouth speaks from the overflow of the heart." So, from the Gospel we hear, it is out of the abundance of the heart that the mouth speaks. And from the book of Ecclesiasticus, a man's words betray what he feels. What Christian disciples do and say must flow from their hearts, and the word heart here refers to one's authentic self, to who we truly are. We are talking here about integrity, about becoming whole. When we talk about persons of integrity, we are speaking of those who practice what they preach. Christian discipleship is the journey to wholeness, eventually becoming, through God's grace, what God always intended us to be. Integrity, therefore, is a harmony between a person's interior and exterior life. In other words, a person is a good tree producing good fruit. And integrity also means that there is a consistency in the practice of goodness from day to day and from year to year. A person bears good fruit season after season. The path to sanctity is therefore the call to integrity, to authenticity, the call to put aside hypocrisy. The Cistercian monk Thomas Merton once wrote, "It is true to say that for me sanctity consists in being myself, and for you sanctity consists in being yourself. For me to be a saint means to be myself. Therefore the problem of sanctity and salvation is in fact the problem of finding out who I am and of discovering my true self." Here we need to sound a note of caution. Discovering one's true self is the polar opposite to narcissism, which places the self at the centre of the universe. This is the tyranny of the ego. The scriptures teach us that we find our true self, paradoxically, by letting go of it. We find ourselves not by looking within, but by looking outwards. Anglican Bishop Graham Tomlin puts it like this: "What if we find our true selves not by looking within, but by being drawn out of ourselves by something outside. In the spring, as the sun begins to warm the air and the earth, you begin to see barren land sprout flowers, and bare branches are soon covered with leaves. The warmth of the sun brings out the hidden potential lying deep in the sap of the trees or the seeds planted deep in the soil. A tree in summer has become its true, glorious self, if we can put it like this, not by regenerating itself from within, but by being drawn out by the sun as it sheds its light and heat. Maybe we too become our true selves by turning not inwards but outwards towards a source of life that is constant, steady, waiting for us to turn in its direction. If we fail to look outwards, we run the risk of becoming like the mythical Narcissus. We become entranced, beguiled and obsessed by our own image, and become devotees of the cult of self. Narcissus, a youth of exceeding beauty and vanity, was the son of the river god Cephissus. Echo, a mountain nymph, fell madly in love with Narcissus, but her love was totally unrequited, and she pined away to become a mere voice, an echo. Angered by this, the god Nemesis determined to punish Narcissus for his vanity. When Narcissus went to drink from a certain pool, he saw his own reflection in the water and was overcome by the sight of his own beauty. Turned inwards, he becomes paralyzed by his obsession with himself. He eventually withers away and becomes a flower which still bears his name. The botanical name of the daffodil is Narcissus. Will Storr's book, Selfie, How the West Became Self-Obsessed, tells the story of the love affair between Western societies and the self. The significance of the book's title, Selfie, is one of Storr's most telling observations. When we develop the technology to take pictures anywhere and any time with devices we carry with us everywhere we go, what do we mostly take pictures of? Ourselves. Storr describes the various ways in which the self has been understood in past societies, but focuses on the extraordinary growth of self-focused therapy and ideology in more recent times. The American journalist David Brooks writes regularly for the New York Times. A few years ago he wrote a satirical article entitled The Morality of Selfism, or The Gospel of St. You. Selfism, as we shall see, can easily become a subtle form of hypocrisy. He writes, "We live in a culture of selfism, a culture that puts tremendous emphasis on self, on self-care and self-display." And he adds, tongue-in-cheek, that one of the things we've discovered is that you can be a very good person while thinking only about yourself. This is a theme that Brooks addressed in one of his books, The Road to Character. There he wrote, "Psychologists have a thing called the narcissism test. They read people's statements and ask if the statements apply to them. Statements such as, 'I like to be the centre of attention. I show off if I get the chance because I am extraordinary. Somebody should write a biography about me.' Now we might laugh at statements like that. How could anybody be so self-obsessed? But Brooks notes that the median narcissism score has risen 30% in the last 20 years. The largest gains have been in the number of people who agree with the statements, "I am an extraordinary person," and "I like to look at my body." Brooks's New York Times article is a satire of selfism and our obsession with ourselves. Selfism holds that no one has the right to tell me what's right and wrong and how I should live my life, he writes. Back in the old days, people thought morality was about living up to some external standard of moral excellence. Abraham Lincoln tried to live a life of honesty and courage. Mother Teresa tried to live up to a standard of selfless love. But now, Brooks writes, tongue-in-cheek, we know this is actually harmful. When people hold up external standards of moral excellence, they often make you feel judged. These people make you feel sad because you may not live up to this standard. It's very cruel of them to make you feel troubled in this way. Boo-hoo! It's very cruel of you to hold up Lincoln and Mother Teresa as standards of moral excellence. You make me feel as though I'm being judged. In other words, what matters most is that you don't hurt my feelings. The moral absolute is that I should not be harmed in any way. I shouldn't be made to feel any pain or discomfort. So the fundamental principle underlying the morality of selfism is that there is no objective right or wrong, and sacrifice, that is, giving up something for a higher good, is complete nonsense. There is no higher good than my happiness and well-being. So again, tongue-in-cheek, Brooks offers us a 4-stage process to make us feel good about ourselves. Firstly, feel indignant all the time. He explains, back in the old days, morality was about loving and serving others, but now it's about displaying indignation about things that other people are doing wrong. You don't have to actually do anything. Your indignation is itself a sign of your own goodness. If you can be indignant quicker than the people around you, that just shows how better you are. Secondly, make yourself heard. Put up a lawn sign or wear a t-shirt that says, "Stop the violence." You're taking a stand and displaying who you are. You're not going to stay silent. You're going to wear your fashion item whether they like it or not. Thirdly, tell your story. You want to inspire others by sharing about yourself. Sometimes you have to keep talking about yourself even though other people selfishly keep interrupting and trying to talk about themselves. Fourthly, you need to condemn bad people. If somebody says something bad, you need to get on your phone right away. You need to tap the parts of the screen that will make it obvious that you are the sort of person who will not stand for bad people saying bad things. So, feel indignant all the time. Make yourself heard. Tell your story. Condemn bad people. In other words, make absolutely sure that you point out with as much fanfare as possible the splinter in your neighbour's eye. And what about yourself? No need to do anything. Brooks ends his article with the tongue-in-cheek advice, "You're already perfect, just the way you are." That's something that would have made the desert fathers and mothers cringe. I've spoken before about the wisdom of the desert fathers and mothers. They have left us many insights into the spiritual life, gathered together under the Greek title Apothegmata ton Agion Geronton, literally Sayings of the Holy Elders. They are also known by the Latin title Verba Seniorum, Words of the Elders. One such story, very relevant to today's Gospel, tells of a group of monks within a certain monastery who had accused one of their brothers of certain violations of the monastic rule of life. And so they summoned the entire community together to pass judgment on their delinquent brother. Abba Moses was called upon to preside at the gathering. As Abba Moses walked into the assembly of monks, he carried a wicker basket filled with fine sand, thereby leaving a trail of sand behind him. By the time he arrived, the basket was almost empty. The monks asked Abba Moses, "What is the meaning of this gesture?" "My own sins are running out like this sand," he replied, "and yet I come to judge the sins of another." The monks quietly returned to their cells without passing judgment on their brother.